Chapter X, Soft Totalitarianism and the Aesthetic Regime. The Nazification of Culture in the Age of Global PR, post 9/11 edition. The aesthetic sphere, long presumed to be a domain of resistance, nuance, and critical reflexivity, has become increasingly complicit in the consolidation of power through symbolic manipulation. What has taken place since the early 2000s, and intensified after 9/11, is not merely an ideological drift, but a systemic reconfiguration of art and culture into instruments of soft totalitarianism. This process might be called the Nazification of the arts, not because it replicates Nazi aesthetics directly, but because it repeats their logic. Conformity masked as radicality, propaganda veiled as inclusion, and spectacle deployed to neutralize dissent. Post 9/11 cultural diplomacy as cover. Following 9/11, Western institutions, particularly in Europe and the Anglosphere, doubled down on the performative display of multicultural values. The rise of identity-based programming in major art institutions coincided not with systemic equity, but with increased surveillance, gatekeeping, and ideological homogenization. Cultural diplomacy became the velvet glove of empire, promoting sanitized narratives of global harmony while whitewashing ongoing neocolonial violence. The so-called inclusion of racial, sexual, or ethnic minorities into these institutions has mostly functioned as symbolic tokenism, often serving the needs of national PR strategies, funding optics, or liberal self-congratulation. These acts of inclusion, carefully curated and strictly conditional, do not dismantle power, but instead reinforce it by absorbing critique into manageable aesthetic gestures. 2. Art as controlled dissent. Much of what passes for political art in this period operates under pre-authorized dissent. Exhibitions critical of capitalism, whiteness, or colonial histories are permitted, even encouraged, as long as they do not interfere with the structural arrangements of funding, visibility, and institutional hierarchy. The critique is staged, not enacted. It is absorbed, converted into reputation capital, and ultimately monetized by the very institutions it nominally critiques. This is the art world's version of fascism, a total absorption of difference into sameness under the guise of pluralism. Control is decentralized, diffused through curatorial policies, grant protocols, and algorithmic visibility. There is no need for an overt censor when taste, etiquette, and prestige perform the functions silently and effectively. And 3. The return of racialized power under liberal camouflage. Despite the rhetoric of progress, the European and global art scenes remain structurally white, not merely in terms of skin tone, but in terms of aesthetic codes, institutional habits, and implicit norms. Power is exercised not through explicit racial exclusion, but through class-based filtering, linguistic codes, social capital networks, and a seamless interface between state and corporate sponsorship. Meanwhile, artists from marginalized or non-European backgrounds are often invited only as translators of their own trauma, expected to frame their narratives in digestible formats that reinforce the moral superiority of the host culture. The other is included only to affirm the centrality and benevolence of the same. This post-9/11 regime of curated pluralism, wherein diversity is essential only as a product category, should be understood not as an advance, but as a refinement of cultural fascism. It has become post-ideological, functioning with surgical precision, even as it brandishes slogans of decolonization, equity, and inclusion. 4. Algorithmic aesthetics and the death of the avant-garde. In the digital era, particularly post-2010, algorithmic platforms have further ossified aesthetic norms, rewarding repetition, superficial novelty, and brand-compliant behavior. Artists who do not fit into marketable categories or who resist social media conformism are rendered invisible, not through censorship, but through non-selection by opaque sorting mechanisms. What emerges is a culture of simulated experimentation, flattened creativity filtered through automated bias, driven by market performance, identity clout, and PR compatibility. The result is a digital avant-garde that is neither avant nor garde, an aesthetic of compliance disguised as disruption. 5. Conclusion: Nazification without Nazis. It is crucial to understand the term Nazification here not as a historical analogy, but as a structural concept, the subordination of culture to control, branding, and hierarchy. The 21st century version is more insidious precisely because it operates without uniforms or goose-stepping mobs. Its tools are bureaucratic, semantic, and algorithmic. Its violence is symbolic, reputational, and economic. It is a culture of disavowal, where moral posturing masks systemic repression, and where radical art functions as the house pet of capital. This is not simply a failure of institutions, but a collapse of the epistemic contract between art and truth, between culture and risk, between aesthetics and ethics. What remains is a theater of ghosts in which power hides behind mirrors, and artists become content providers for the machine.